This month is Financial Literacy Month, so we've been talking about this for a long time, right? God asks us to be stewards of our finances, and church is a place that we come to get fed spiritually, physically, but I think it's also really important to our ministry for us to also get fed financially, right? In the ways to handle our finances. God asks us to be a steward of our finances and to be faithful with the little, so that as He blesses us, we can be faithful with the much. And so, yeah, we wanted to take some time today to fellowship together, to eat together, which is very important. Free food, really big. Point number one in finance is always say yes to free food. So thank you everybody for coming. Obviously, this is really important to all of us. I wanted to introduce my brother Mason Bryant. Mason and I grew up together in Pasadena. Mason was a star football player in high school at Monrovia. He came all the way out from Monrovia today, so we appreciate you for doing that. Mason, I'm kind of doing the introduction for him. I'm sure he'll talk about himself a little bit too. He went to UPenn out in the East Coast, played football there, and he works at Merrill Lynch now in wealth management. People pay him for his time and services to help manage their finances. So him being a believer and a man of God really wanted to bless us with his time to share, all that God has provided in terms of his knowledge and experience for the church. So really important, meant a lot. When I asked him, he didn't hesitate. He's like, I love that you guys are doing this, and I want to be a part. So thank you for that. And so with no further ado, I will let you take over.
Thanks, Robel. Afternoon, everybody. Thanks to Robel and the Finance Committee for having me here. Pastor Israel for extending the invitation to come and speak to you guys about finances and the fundamentals of financial literacy and how to really get you started on the journey if that's where you are, or continue to talk through and answer any questions if you're a little bit further along. Do we have the slides to pull up? And while they pull that up, perfect. So yeah, Robel gave a little bit of introduction about me. I grew up in Monrovia, went to play football at the University of Pennsylvania, spent 4 years there, dedicated a lot of time and effort into sport, and then one day it just ended, and no one really talks to you about what you do when you end. But at the end of the day, all good things do eventually come to an end, and a new journey started. So I came back home, planned to go to law school, ended up not wanting to go to law school, and found my way into a wealth management practice and the industry. And I work with a team that manages over $500 million at Merrill Lynch currently. So I'm really looking forward to sharing with you guys the basics and the fundamentals of financial literacy, and then be able to answer any questions. A lot of you guys all of you guys should have a couple of handouts, and so we're going to try to make it a little bit interactive as well, so that you guys kind of get more out of this than me just speaking at you. I don't know if I could do better than Israel on talking today. So want to make it a little bit interactive. If you go to the next slide. These are just quick disclaimers that we have to give. I do provide investment services, investment advice, and some of the products that we offer, they can lose value and they are risky, and some of them are not guaranteed. We won't necessarily be talking too much about products specifically today, but I don't want to get fired, so got to put that up there. Next slide. So there's a couple key concepts that we're going to cover, and then a couple here that I'll touch on briefly that aren't up there, but are definitely important on the next steps to the journey once you've kind of established a good financial foundation and base. So the big key concepts that we start with all of our clients are setting goals, creating a budget, managing debt and credit, preparing for the future, and building an emergency fund. So there's a lot of different ways that ultimately people want to talk about their financial goals. And so if you go to the next slide, we'll jump right into setting up goals. So turn my page here too, actually. So when it comes to setting goals, I actually had a conversation with a couple of my colleagues, and a goal without a plan is really just a wish at the end of the day. And so you're 62% more likely to achieve your goals if you write them down. That helps you actually put them into action. And one of the executives at Bank of America that I was talking to on Thursday, he said, I hate when people write down things on like a sticky note. And I sat there and I was a little bit offended because I write a lot of stuff down on sticky notes. And at the end of the day, I realized that what he was saying is when you put something down on a sticky note, there's a good chance it gets thrown away, it gets lost, different things like that happen. I was like, okay, yes, I get that. So writing down goals, super important. We all have iPhones or Android phones, smartphones. There's a notes app in there. Write down the goals that you have. They can really be powerful motivators for you. And so we're going to, at the end of this section, we're going to take out the wealth planning questionnaire. And on the third page, I believe, it talks about at Bank of America and Merrill Lynch, we look at our 7 life priorities and quantifying those life priorities into dollar amounts and how we ultimately, can get on the path to being able to fund those. So writing down goals is super important. Write it down, put it somewhere. If you do like the vision boards or anything like that, really great to have, those goals in front of you so you can be constantly reminded. For a long time, I would put my goals as my screensaver so that every time I opened my phone, I knew what my goals were. So next slide. So you want to, as you write down those goals, you want to clearly define what those goals are, what they mean to you, and why they matter. So the first one, obviously, why does this goal matter to me? Is it something that I've had a goal for a number of years? Is it something that's a little bit more aspirational? Why do I want to save? Why do I want to spend my money on said goal? Next is what is the purpose? What's the purpose of this goal? Is it to, buy a house? Is it to go on a vacation? Is it to have, enough in emergency savings? Is it to, have enough money in retirement so I don't outlive my money? Is it to pass money on to the next generation and really build that idea of generational wealth that tends to be very, very important in our community and talking about it in our community, but not a lot of people actually put that into action of, okay, well, what does it mean to save, not only for me and my family now, but for my family and my family's family after I've gone. When do you want to reach it? Put a timetable. Put it, 2 years, 3 years. I want to reach it in January of 2030. Whatever that might be, define, when you would like to reach that goal. And looking at when defining that, how much is that goal ultimately going to cost you? Is it going to be $1,000, $2,000, $5,000, $200,000, $1 million? Each goal has its own level of expense that it's going to cost. We obviously all live in California, or most of us live in California. To retire in California, I've seen a lot of people need upwards to $5 million by the time they retire to not outlive their money. So how much? How much is it going to cost you to buy a house? California, 20% down on $1 million property is $200,000 just for the down payment. So write down next to those goals how much it's going to cost. And then what kind of actions you need to take. And really this is the most important when we're looking at defining and talking about your goals. Like I said, a goal without a plan is really just a wish. I can have a goal of saving $200,000 for a down payment, but if I'm not actually saving to get to that dollar amount, then what's the point of even having that goal in the first place? So we sit with our clients and ultimately define their goals, talk with them further, and frankly, a lot of times we uncover that people have a lot of goals that they haven't even necessarily realized were goals. I want to give more money to church. I want to go on X amount of vacations. I want to pay for my child's education or my grandchild's education. whatever that might be, having that plan to get there is ultimately the most important step. So next slide. So when we're talking about evaluating, a financial picture, goals is obviously important, but then with that comes a lot of times the needs, the transportation, the rent, the mortgage, the utilities, the child care, et cetera. So a lot of times we want to take a look at needs and goals as two separate ideas. And setting up a spending plan can really help keep you on track with those needs so that you know how much you have left over to ultimately save for the goals. And a spending plan is basically, a budget. And there's another handout in the folders that you guys got that we use with our clients, the wealth management expense worksheet. It's essentially a budget. A lot of people used to do it on a spreadsheet. Now you can do it on a one-pager. You can keep it with you. You need to be able to track what's coming in and what's going out. And it's really that guide and that foundation to navigating all of your expenses and navigating any challenges that might come up, because those unexpected things definitely do come up. And this can also really help you determine if you're living within your means. And we'll kind of get into that later in the presentation, but a lot of people live outside of their means, and that doesn't always mean that you don't have a lot of money and so you can't spend a lot of money. There are a lot of wealthy people that live outside of their means. I've run into people that say, I want to go buy this house. It's $4 or $5 million, and it's going to be a $10,000 mortgage payment, but they only make $8,000 after taxes coming in. Well, how are you going to live within your means if you can't even cover your mortgage? So having an expense worksheet, having a budget really allows for you to determine and know, okay, if I have X amount of dollars coming in and I'm spending X amount on what I need to spend, this is what I have left over. This is what I might need to ultimately change. Next slide. So budgeting for day-to-day expenses is probably something that everybody does without necessarily realizing that they do it. And it's very easy to do it in your head, to be quite frank. You know how much the rent is, you know how much it costs when you go to the grocery store, you know how much it costs to fill up your tank with gas. But on average, as of September of last year, the average consumer, which is all of us, spend just over $32,500 per year per person on just essential expenses. So that doesn't even consider going on vacations. That doesn't consider. I'm at the age where I'm going to a lot of weddings. Weddings are super expensive, outside of my realm of necessary expenses. Vacations, gifts, things like that are outside the day-to-day, outside this $32,500. The essential expenses is really food, housing, probably transportation, and then clothes and apparel to wear. So entertainment, eating out, going to the movies, going to a sports game, not even factored into this $32,500. So just knowing that kind of gives you a good baseline of, okay, this is what I know it reasonably costs me to live my life every day. Next slide. So you need to understand your spending in order to know how to potentially change your spending if you need, as well as knowing how to save. So we talked about writing it down, and that first step, utterly important. You have your income and your expenses, and you want to be able to prioritize what you're spending your money on, the essential versus the non-essential. The essential things, like I said, your house, the food, transportation to get to and from work, the child care if you have children, all those things are necessary, essential expenses. The nice car with a high car payment, the brand new iPhone, the weddings, the vacations, all those things, we really deem it non-essential. And when we're sitting with our clients and we talk with them about, well, what's essential and what's not, that question is really answered differently for everybody. Some people think that some of their spending is essential when it's really not. One of the best pieces of advice that I got from a former boss of mine was, When you start making money, you're going to want new things. You're going to want the new car. You're going to want the new phone. If your phone works, why go get the new one every year or every 2 years? If you have your car paid off, it still gets you from point A to point B. Why go get an $800,000, $900,000 car payment just to have a new car? So prioritizing what's essential, what's non-essential, and then identifying patterns as well. What are some of the impulse buys? We all have them. Tax season just ended, and a lot of us probably paid a little bit more, but a lot of us also probably got a refund back from the federal government. Essentially, that's money, that's the found money that we weren't necessarily expecting. Impulse buys happen with a lot of those. Oh, I just got an extra $2,000. I'm going to go buy X, Y, and Z that I've been wanting to buy, as opposed to sitting and saying, I'm going to take 1,000 of this and save it, and I'm going to spend the rest however I, ultimately want to spend it. And then there's also spending leaks. What are things that you're spending money on that ultimately you're not even realizing that you're spending money on? Maybe it's, I got Netflix. maybe I got Netflix. I don't even watch Netflix, but I'm still paying for it. It's just coming out of my account all the time. Little things, depending on what your lifestyle is, can definitely be spending leaks. It can get you outside of that budget that you create without even realizing it. And so what I do with a lot of people is I tend to be more conservative with people spending. If somebody tells me they spend $50,000 a year, when we build the financial plan, I'm going to put that you spend $60,000 a year. Why? Because I know that people are people, and they have impulse buys, and they have spending leaks. I'm guilty of it just as much as everybody else, so don't think because I work in this industry that I'm perfect in that. It happens, but the key to it is really identifying those things and trying to lessen those to the extent that you can. And so many of us, because we're human, we fall into the emotional spending of things. I'm not in this camp in terms of, being sad or upset and needing some retail therapy, but some of you guys might be. That's totally okay. But we get emotionally invested in, our finances, and then we let our emotions, ultimately sometimes dictate what we spend money on. I am guilty of being that person that's, I'm feeling a little bit down, I'm going to go treat myself to a nice dinner. Impulse buy, spending leaks, all those things happen. But where you can help kind of mitigate some of those emotions is working with somebody like myself, like the team, to ultimately have that third party, oversight might be the wrong word, but have that third party kind of walking alongside with you and being, hey, I saw you spent money on this, tell me about it. Then you're ultimately able to talk through it, identify it, and having somebody who's unbiased towards your spending habits ultimately be able to tell you, maybe you shouldn't have spent money on this. It's almost like having a therapist. That's sometimes my job as well. And so one thing that if you fall, subject to an impulse buy or a spending leak, one really good actionable item that we talk through with our clients is wait 3 days, 72 hours, 3-5 days, to see if you still want to buy the thing that you're ultimately going out to purchase. I'm very guilty of looking up something and saying, I want to buy that, and then waiting and then being like, maybe I don't really need it. It's actually really, really helpful because your whole mindset could be different, 3 days time, 5 days time. It really does sometimes take the emotion out of I'm feeling down, I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling, whatever you're feeling, angry, and letting you kind of, with cooler heads, prevail on making a financial decision. So next slide. But all this, you got to wrap in the fun stuff too. And hobbies cost money, and so you really want to sit down and be able to determine what do you enjoy to do outside of the childcare, outside of the mortgage payment or the rent payment, outside of the groceries. What do you like to do? Do you like to travel? Do you like to garden? Do you like to fix cars? Anything that you do can ultimately have some costs associated with it. But lives are more than just the day-to-day grind. And a lot of times we need these things to help keep us going. a big one for a lot of people, especially post-pandemic, is the socializing. You know, a lot of people, all of us, were locked up for 2 years. Now we're finally getting back out and doing things, and now we're realizing, oh, this drink at this bar is now $15. This restaurant is now charging $30 for the same meal. So just going out and doing the things that we were really not able to do for 2 years, you know, has increased people's, you know, spending, and the pandemic has really taken people outside the mindset of, oh, going out and socializing with people, going out and doing things that I enjoy also, you know, cost money. And then there's always the things that we do that come up out of nowhere, but we can kind of plan for those things, you know, as they come. Like I said, I'm in the age and stage of my life where weddings are happening all the time. I have 4 this year. So planning around those special events and knowing, okay, in May I have this wedding, it's going to cost me this much. In December I have this wedding, it's going to cost me this much. If you've just recently got married, how much is our honeymoon going to cost? If you want to buy a new home, how much do I need to put down? When do I want to, you know, have that money saved up? Often several of these major events can happen like simultaneously. So knowing that, okay, I have X, Y, and Z, I need a plan for X, Y, and Z to make sure I have enough money. And sometimes it means, you know, changing the style of vacation. Sometimes it means maybe not going as nice of a place. Sometimes you find out, oh, we can afford more than I actually thought. You know, let's go somewhere nicer. Let's do something, you know, better than we initially planned. And then the final slide for this one. So when we look at creating a budget, there's really the 50-30-20 rule. And so 50% needs, 30% wants, and 20% savings. If I was the one who made this actual presentation, I would have switched savings and wants in terms of order that they are. Yes, you need 50% of your income that comes in to your needs, the utilities, the housing, the groceries, the transportation. But really what you want to do before you spend money on what you want is spend money on yourself first. And I don't mean go out and go buy the new pair of shoes or go buy, you know, the new dress. Save your money, you know, pay yourself, save that 20%, before you go and you spend that 30% on whatever you want. And you want to look at these numbers with your after-tax dollars. So once you get the paycheck coming in, this is how much I have. I'm going to take 50%. If it's, let's say, $4,000, I'm going to take $2,000. It's all going to my essential needs. I'm going to take 20% of what's left. I'm going to save that into a retirement account. I'm going to save it into a savings account, a brokerage account, whatever that kind of account might be. And then 30% to your wants to, again, do the things that you ultimately you know, want to do. And so before we jump into the next topic and before we jump into kind of letting you guys define what some of your goals are, you know, there's a lot of different ways when it comes to saving for yourself that you can do that. If you guys work for a company and they offer a 401k plan, my recommendation, you should be in the 401k plan. It's an easy way to save your money before it's taxed into an account that's ultimately going to benefit you in the future. If you don't work for a company that offers a 401k plan, there are accounts called individual retirement accounts that you can set up for yourself. You know, you can put money away to that for retirement. A big thing is a health savings account, which really is used for qualified medical expenses. People get in car accidents, people get injured, you know, your health is super important. You want to save for those big medical expenses. A quick aside, when I was a freshman at UPenn, I was there for about 3 weeks, and I got appendicitis. And I walked around with it for 4 days. I still went to practice. And I walked into student health on basically my deathbed, and they were like, we need to take you to the hospital. They took me to the hospital, did the CAT scans. Doctors came in and essentially said, yeah, you should have been dead like 2 days ago. And so I looked at that and I said, all right, so what? I'm here. What are we going to do about it? 2 weeks later, I finally got out of the hospital. I had post-surgery complications. I was unable to hold down any food, water. And so while I'm, in the hospital, I'm not necessarily thinking about how much all of this is costing. Then I started getting the bills from Kaiser. I had multiple bills that were $200,000 each. Me being in the hospital for 2 weeks as an 18-year-old kid, if my family didn't have health insurance, probably would have cost us over $1 million. And I probably wouldn't be sitting here with you guys today if that was the case. But how can we ultimately plan for those things that are unexpected? We don't know what the price might be. We don't know. I was completely unaware that this is what the first experience of my time in Philadelphia would be. But planning for those things ultimately in a way that, hey, I have some money set aside for any health emergencies, that might come up. So I'm happy to answer any questions on ways you can save, accounts you can kind of save into, and we're going to take questions with the note cards later. But to make it a little bit more interactive for you guys, if you want to pull up the wealth management questionnaire, and on page 3, so we walk through, on page 3 is the page we're going to go to, and so this is like the first thing we do with all of our clients. After we get to know them a little bit and understand, we want to know what their goals are and what's most important to them. So on that page 3, you see our 7 life priorities: finance, home, health, leisure, work, family, and giving. And so what I want you guys to do, and we'll take some time doing, maybe 5-7 minutes to do, is go through each of these 7. Write down what is important to you in each of those categories, and it might be very basic. Sometimes a home might be, I just want to be able to meet my mortgage payment. I just want to be able to meet my rent. It might be I want to buy a house. Health, giving, family, all those things. So take some time with the pens. Write down some of those goals that you have in each of those 7 categories, and don't be shocked if one of the, like, I don't have any kids, so I don't have a big family goal. So depending on where you're at in life, this is very specific for you and what is important to you at that moment. So take some time. I'll be back up in about 5 minutes, and I'll walk around to answer any questions.
Hey guys, quick announcement. We excuse me. We have little like flashcards if you want to ask questions and want to do it anonymously. So if you don't have a flashcard, raise your hand. We can bring one, or we'll walk around with them and we can hand them out. But just as you're going through and you hear stuff, you have questions, feel free to write them down. Awesome. Yeah, and if you need a folder, raise your hand. We can bring you one.
All right, so as you guys are finishing up writing some goals, the great thing about these, you guys can obviously take all the handouts home. I definitely encourage you to spend some more time than just the 5 or so minutes that we took now. Really thinking about, what your goals are. What are the things that you ultimately want to accomplish. Sitting and taking some real thought. Sorry. Taking some real thought into that. So we're going to kind of jump to the next portion in terms of kind of creating a budget and tracking expenses. So if you want to go to the next slide. So this is an example. Essentially of a balance sheet or income statement for somebody. You have your monthly expenses there on the left-hand side, and you have your monthly net income there on the right-hand side. So if we just look at the example, really quickly, this person, let's call him person A, spends about $2,000 on rent and insurance, $500 a month on food and personal care, $500 a month on bills, $200 a month on credit card payments, and $400 a month on miscellaneous things, gifts, clothes, and entertainment. So their total monthly expenses, about $3,600 a month, which fits right into that realm of the average, single person spending about $32,500 a year. So then when we look at their income, they make just over $3,000 a month in wages after they pay taxes. They have a self-employment job, let's just say Uber in this case, for $200. So their total income coming in on a monthly basis is $3,205. So when we look at that, they have a gap of close to $400 on a monthly basis. $400 a month doesn't really seem like it's that much. Maybe you have a couple $1,000 saved away that's kind of helping you meet that gap. But $400 over a 12-month period is close to $5,000 a year that you're trying to ultimately make up for. So this person essentially makes $40,000 a year and $200 a month from the self-employment. In this example, this person is also not saving any money into a 401k plan or any kind of retirement plan. They're also not saving any money into an emergency fund. So how are you going to accomplish the goals that you've set out to save for if you're not saving for retirement, if you're not saving into an emergency fund, or if you're not actually saving for that goal in itself? So there's really one of two things that this person could do. One, they could find a way to gap that $400 a month. Maybe it's working, more as an Uber driver. Maybe they don't have the time to do that, so they have to, pick up another little side hustle to try to meet that $400 gap. But for a lot of people, we live busy lives. It's a tougher conversation for us to have, but it's where can we cut down on some of the expenses. The big one here that I see that would prompt the big red flag to me is the $200 a month on the credit card payments. Credit cards can be, a very, very great resource, but they can also be used to people's detriment. And we'll get into talking about credit, a little bit later in the presentation. So, knowing what you make and how much you have coming in, and what you are spending, like I said, is really key to having and building that financial foundation. So I do want to take another quick 5 minutes for everybody to fill out a personal expense worksheet. Like I said, this is essentially a budget, and we make it easy for you by giving you the things that most people spend money on. This is a little bit dated in my opinion. One that should be on there is streaming services. How much are we paying for Apple Music? How much are we paying for Netflix and Disney Plus? How much are we paying for Apple Care? But those can all be looked at as either one, household expenditures, or some of your discretionary. The Netflix, the Apple, Music, all probably more discretionary, more so because you can still live your life without having those expenses. Might not be as fun at that time, but look, you're either gonna gap $400 a month, or you're gonna cut down on something if it's necessary. So spend some time, spend a couple minutes, and kind of walk through each of those line items. I always found it a lot easier to look at the expenses monthly. We typically know how much a month we're spending on things. Some of the things are going to be more annual numbers, and so feel free to put it wherever it goes. Take some time doing that.
I had a question. So some of these expenses I don't make on a monthly basis. So like traveling, I'm not traveling every month. I tend to like go every couple months, and then even like my house's gas and electric are charged every 2 months for where I live. So when it comes to budgeting for those things on a monthly basis, is that something that I should change every month, or should I like the way I'm doing it now is with travel and things like that, I have like a savings bucket that I pull out of for those things and I just keep a watch of how much is coming out of the savings. But is there a way to better implement that into my monthly?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when it comes to some expenses that are going to fluctuate on a monthly basis, gas. I mean, what in January, people's gas bills were triple what they are now. Vacations and traveling. When it comes to something that's maybe more on like a 2-month basis, try to take like a nice average. So if you're spending, let's say $100 on gas one month and $150 the next month, maybe budget for like $125, $130 a month because it's going to fluctuate. When it comes to like travel and vacations, really the best way to do that is set a goal at the beginning of the year with, okay, I have 3 trips, a couple weddings, whatever it might be. I think it's going to cost me this amount, so this is going to be my budget. So let's say for those 3 trips, it's going to cost you $6,000, $7,000. So your expense for travel would be $7,000. If you're wanting to save, for something that is coming up in the future, take that one expense that might only happen one time a month and divide it by 12 to have that monthly, okay, I'm saving this a month, or this is how much I'm budgeting a month for, a vacation or something like that. So it's always nice when, at the end of the day, you expect to pay more and then you don't pay as much. But again, being of the more conservative mind, you want to plan to spend more than you're actually going to do because that's a better place to be in than I budgeted to spend $5,000, I actually spent $5,500. Now well, where do I have to pull from to ultimately meet that gap, especially if your income is fairly stable and you're kind of getting the same paychecks, every 2 weeks, at the end of every month. So good question on that. Kind of look at it as, an annual expense when it comes to travel as opposed to a monthly expense because, you're not going to travel every month, and so you don't want to budget out too much. But if you just say, I'm planning to spend this much every month, that's going to accumulate to X amount of dollars at the end of the year, that puts you right there at the budget.
I just have a quick question. If we have student loans or like credit card debt, would you add that under discretionary, like other, or where should we put that?
So yeah, and you're kind of jumping into what we should talk about when it comes to debt. If you have student loans, things like that, that should be looked at as an essential expense, especially if you're trying to pay down that debt as quickly as possible. Anything extra, so let's say you have a $500 a month student loan payment, which I don't know, that might be high, it might not be. If you're budgeting for $500 to pay that $500 a month, that's where you want to put, this is an essential expense that I want to pay. Let's say you have a couple, $100 extra dollars, and you want to put that towards the student loan. That you would put under discretionary because you don't necessarily need to pay that extra $100. It's ultimately going to be beneficial for you in the long run because it'll help you pay down the debt more quickly. But if something comes up and you're like, oh, I got an extra $100 here that I can spend, that's more of a discretionary. So look at those things as essential payments. Can we go to the next slide? All right, as the next slide comes up. So now you guys have taken some time, writing down what your goals are and writing down what your expenses are. I always find the hardest thing with the expenses is I'll write something down and say, I don't spend that much on that. And then you look back at your credit card statements or your bank accounts and say, okay, maybe I did spend a little bit more. So again, a trick that I use, a tactic that I use is to over budget for things that I know might have more of a fluctuation. The big one for me in particular and for a lot of people is the travel and the vacations. You think you're going to spend X amount on a vacation, you end up spending a little bit more. So if you can err on the side of budgeting more, it's gonna put you at a better place. And so they're getting the next slide, but kind of tying all these things together. One, defining what your goals are, and prioritizing paying yourself first and saving for yourself first. And then the final is managing your spending. So essentially with the expense worksheet and the questionnaire, you've done the first and third thing. You've kind of managed what your spending is. You know how much you're spending on an annual basis or a monthly basis, and then you're defining your goals. Ultimately, what am I doing with any extra money that I might have? Keep track of that over a period of time. A budget doesn't need to be done every day, every week, every month. Really, it should be looked at once, twice a year as you have things that come up. As you have things that come up, that's when you want to go and you ultimately want to revisit, any changes that might need to be made, to that budget. And so if you find yourself at a place where a lot of people do, that you're ultimately spending more money than money that you have coming in, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're spending more money than you have, because you might have savings, but it just means you're spending more than you are making. Consider cutting back on some of the things that aren't as necessary. Cutting out one of the streaming services that you might not necessarily, watch all that much or don't find a lot of value out of. Those things can be really crucial to, helping you ultimately get into the next topic of building an emergency savings and saving for, unforeseen expenses, as well as, saving for the goals that you have for yourself. So, next slide. So, building emergency savings is extremely important. I was talking with Robel before I got up here that I'd gotten back from Arizona a couple weeks ago, walked into my laundry room and realized after all the rain there was a leak and the whole drywall just fell out. And so, luckily for me, I'm not a homeowner, so I didn't have to pay for it. Unlucky for my landlord, he had to pay for it. Fixing a roof is very expensive. It probably costs him $20,000, $30,000 to fix the roof. If you don't have that money, where are you going to get it from? So when we look at savings, we really look at three buckets, and this is really the three buckets of like essential savings, for your finances, for your goals. So you have your checking account, the account that you pay the bills out of, the account that you're using to buy food. If you're paying rent, mortgage, that's just kind of a revolving account that really has your basic needs, covered in that one account on a monthly basis. So if you have $3,000 coming in a month, maybe you should have $4,000 in that account. The second bucket is that middle tier bucket, and a lot of times we do call it an emergency fund. 34% of people really don't have an emergency fund, and things come up, all the time. 51% of those people can fund expenses for less than 3 months. And so really the rule of thumb when it comes to an emergency fund, you should have anywhere between 3 and 6 months of expenses in that account. So if your monthly expenses are $3,000 a month, maybe you should have $9,000, $12,000, $15,000 in an emergency fund, just for anything that comes up unforeseen. A lot of times for a lot of people, they get laid off, they transition jobs, and now they're without an income for a period of time. Well, how are you going to pay for the things that you ultimately need to pay for if you don't have something set aside and saved for yourself? The statistic that really blew my mind was the bottom one that says 25% of people don't have an emergency fund. That can really, really put you at one life event, can wipe out all the things that you've ultimately been saving for, and can really get you off track of your financial plan and the goals that you want to accomplish. So one actionable item that I learned that a lot of people don't do but can be really, really valuable is, let's say you just paid off your car. You don't have a car payment anymore. Kudos, because paying off anything can be tough. Now you're saying, I got $300 extra a month discretionary. Well, that's true. But at some point you're going to need a new car. And so at some point, you might have a new car payment. So instead of taking that extra $300 and just spending it on whatever, why don't you take that extra $300 and save that into a fund that's ultimately going to help you fund purchasing your new car, or being able to not spend money on a monthly basis that you have coming in from income, that you could just draw down on that fund until you exhaust it, to ultimately pay for your car payment that you will have in the future. So planning for those things, those unforeseen things that you know right now it might not be a high priority, but it will change in the future, can really be helpful. And so creating an emergency fund for that is something that not a quarter of the people in this country don't do, and then they get hit with these big expenses that ultimately wipe them out. Next slide. So when we think about how an emergency fund, can help you, essentially it can help pay for those extra expenses without derailing your spending and your financial plan. So how can you do that? You can avoid paying credit card interest. You can prevent future setbacks, kind of creating that cushion. That's why it's an emergency fund. And then it can also help you avoid taking out unnecessary loans, whether that's a traditional loan or something from like your 401k plan. When it comes to building that emergency fund, the key is really not derailing you from the plan that you've kind of set out for yourself. Knowing you have an emergency expense coming up, you get in a car accident, you have to replace a roof, you have to do whatever. It can really help keep you on track with all that. Next slide. So when we look at, again, going kind of back to deciding on that goal and really setting up an emergency fund for that goal, how do we get there? Start small. Aim to save $500,000, a month initially, if you can do that. If you can't, $250. If you can't, $100. If you can't do that, $50. Anything is better than nothing, and can really, over time, accumulate and begin to build, a solid bucket for you in the emergency fund. After you've reached that initial goal, continue to save enough for your living expenses. So you can see a single person between 3 and 6 months. For a family, between 6 and 9 months, in an emergency fund. And again, pay yourself first. Technology is everywhere today, including in our industry. Actually, so much so that they're pushing us to get people to use the technology more. That's never fun with 85-year-old clients, but we're trying to do it. So set up something to pay yourself automatically. Take the money out before you even have it in your checking account. I personally do this. My car payment goes to a completely separate account that is only for my car payment. It doesn't even hit my Bank of America account. I don't even see that money. It's paid, it's done, and I use everything else to ultimately pay for the expenses that I have. So do that. It's a really good way to help keep yourself disciplined and not fall through the cracks in terms of, oh, well, I didn't save this month. It's okay. Like, I can go and save next month. Or, it's been 3 months. Like, I'll start saving, in 6 months' time. So if you know you're doing that automatically, somebody is doing it for you, it can be really beneficial in keeping you disciplined. Any found money, gifts, tax refunds, bonuses, again, those should go into your emergency fund. It always feels good to get money you didn't expect, and a lot of times people think that it's like ghost money, like I didn't expect this, now I have a lot more, but that can be really helpful to build up that savings. Yes? Yeah, that's a great question. So I definitely, if you have the means to be able to do that, do that. If your lifestyle hasn't really changed all that much from December 31, when you were getting $40,000 a year, to January 1, where now you're making $50,000 a year, that's $10,000 extra dollars. Now, yeah, taxes and things like that will be a little bit different. But at the end of the day, if your lifestyle hasn't changed, if nothing has changed, take that extra money, save it off the top, and live within your means, at your previous salary. Good question. Next slide. Yeah. Yeah, so great question there as well. Her question was essentially if you can't do the auto pay to yourself, you can't set up savings automatically because your income is fluctuating, what do you do? One, working with somebody can help you do that so that they know and they can hold you, accountable to, hey, you wanted to save $200 a month regardless of what your income was. Are you doing that? And so if you don't have an accountability partner, the best thing to do is really to just get into the habit of doing that first. Like revisit and reprioritize what's important to you, because if you don't remember, you don't have an idea of what you're actually saving for, it's very easy to say, oh, okay, well, I don't have the extra $200 this month, so like I can just spend it. Or, my income was a little bit lower this month, so I'm ultimately, I can't do the savings. Well, if you want to buy a house in 5 years and your goal is to save, $12,000 a year for the next 5 years to put a down payment, ultimately that's going to put you maybe 1 month back, but then 1 month turns into 3 turns into 6. Now you have this goal of buying a house in 5 years. Now it's a 7-year goal. And what happens, when life changes in that you get married, you have kids, deaths in the family, you got to travel, vacations, all those things start to kind of compile on. And your 5-year goal now just got pushed out to a 10-year goal. And so the first and foremost would be to work with somebody to help kind of keep you accountable in that. The next thing is just remember what you're saving for and remember that that's as important, and try to just ultimately then save what you can. If it's a percentage that you're saving, I'm saving 5%. Well, okay, if I made $100, $200, $300, $1,000 less, well, I'm gonna take 5% of what I did make and then ultimately save it. So maybe now you're not saving $200, maybe you're saving $75, but you're still saving. Good question. So tying it all together, an emergency fund can help fund those unexpected expenses, medical expenses, job loss, car and home payments, unexpected vet bills, and can really provide you a general peace of mind if you know that, okay, I can cover any emergency expense that might ultimately come up, and continue to add to that. The third bucket we'll kind of jump into when it comes to retirement. But I want to touch now on managing debt and using credit on the next slide. So over the course of their life, a person typically pays $279,000 on interest alone on credit purchases. So a credit purchase is essentially you're borrowing money and then you ultimately have to pay that back. So if I gave Robel $5 and he said, I'll pay you back in a month, I might charge 3% interest. So he owes me a little bit more than the $5 than he actually took, right? So over the course of like $279,000, a lot of that is home. A mortgage is expensive, and you pay a significant amount in interest over that potential like 30-year term. Some of them are shorter term. Credit cards. Credit cards are the highest interest lines of credit that usually banks offer. I think the average interest on a credit card is anywhere between 17 and 20%. Some of them going as high as 25, 30%. So essentially that means you're going to have to pay 30% more on the money that you're borrowing. And so it's important to ultimately pay down credit as quickly as possible. If you can pay more into a credit card payment, do that. Pay off the line. If you can pay more into a mortgage payment, do that. It helps increase the equity in the home as well as reducing how long you might have to pay. Credit history is extremely vital. That's how people are able to buy cars. That's how people are able to buy houses. You want to have good credit so that people will give you more money so that you can go buy more expensive things. A lot of times people don't manage their credit. Not paying off a credit card, paying late on a credit card, all those things affect your credit history and ultimately make it so a bank doesn't want to loan you the money because their concern is, well, am I going to get this money back in the term that I took it as well as, at all. Next slide. So when we look at understanding credit, it is the borrowing of money with the promise of paying it back in the future. good credit is, shows the history of you meeting those payments, paying down those lines, and using the credit responsibly. So that'd be a credit card, a mortgage. The non-traditional credits, what that a lot of banks are starting to look at now: rent, cell phone, utilities. If you're constantly paying your rent on time, that should amount to, hey, I can be a good creditor. I'm somebody who pays back what I said I would pay back in a timely manner. When you're looking to get a loan from a bank, right now they're really only looking at your credit history. And so if your credit score is 400, 300, 500, you're going to want to evaluate the ways that you can ultimately bring that score up, because interest rates are high right now in relative terms to what they have been over the last couple of years. What a lot of people don't understand is that at the end of the day, the bank might give you the loan, but you might paying 2% higher because your credit isn't that good. Whereas if you have good credit, you might be paying a lower rate because they know that, oh, you're good for those payments. So understand that the money really isn't free. You're paying for that back over time. The one thing that we run into with a lot of people is they use a credit card, they have big credit card expenses, it put them back on their financial plan. Now they don't want to use credit cards. I exclusively use a credit card for all my purchases. And there's really one major reason, because with a credit card, you get money back. They'll give you cash back on groceries, they'll give you cash back on gas, they'll give you cash back on shopping. And so if I'm using that and spending that as it is anyway, and they're willing to give me money back on that, 2, 3, 4, 5%, that's ultimately money that I'm making by just living my life and doing the expenses. The key to that is you have to pay off the credit card every single month. You don't want to go and run up a $5,000 credit card charge, only have $2,000 in your account, and then be stuck paying 25% interest on a $2,000 line of credit. Because that $2,000 now, without doing anything, is $2,400, something like that, right? So if you're going to use a credit card for your everyday expenses, don't put more on your card than you have in your checking account. If you have $5,000 in your checking account, your credit card should never go above $5,000. Even if your credit line is $100,000, how are you ever going to pay off $100,000 if you have only $5,000, right? So that's how you can use a credit card to your advantage and ultimately get the cash back for the things that you're doing purchases on. But the big caveat is you have to pay down that credit card every single month. And if you can't, and it's a big expense, then consider using a debit card where you have the money, you're not going to spend it if you don't have it because you don't want the overdraft. And so it can be really helpful. And a lot of times it is easier to make big purchases borrowing other people's money. If the bank is willing to give you money for a home purchase, why not take it? You just have to make sure you're doing the right things from a credit standpoint to ultimately meet the obligation on a consistent basis and pay down that line of credit. Next slide. So looking at an example, what you really pay when you use credit, balance is $7,800. There's a minimum monthly payment at 3%, so $234. Seems very reasonable. I can cover $234 a month at the minimum. It would take 44 months for you to pay off that $7,800 loan on your credit card. What they don't tell you is that last portion there where it says the approximate cost of the interest is $2,354. So now the loan that you took of $7,800 is now closer to $10,000. You didn't spend $10,000, you only spent the $7,800, but if you had $7,800 in your checking account and you were able to pay off that line 1 month after you bought whatever it is you purchased, you don't pay that $2,354 extra dollars in interest. Interest is really the silent killer when it comes to people's expenses. So you want to be mindful of what interest rate you're actually paying on a credit card, on a mortgage, on a car payment, to be able to avoid having to pay essentially money that you didn't want to spend in the first place. And so if you do have to make a big purchase and you're planning to spend $700-800, calculate the credit, or calculate the interest, and know that, okay, I have $10,000. I need to have $10,000 if I'm going to pay this off, using the monthly minimum payments. So my piece of advice, if you do use a credit card now and you're paying the monthly minimum, pay more than that. It'll pay down the credit line. It'll help increase your credit. And ultimately, you won't pay as much in interest over the life of that loan. Next slide. So there's really good credit and bad credit. So the good credit, mortgages, car loans, student loans. The bad credit is the medical debt, the high interest credit cards, and the personal or payday loans. Looking at this person, credit card 1 and 2, they have an outstanding balance of $2,500 and $3,000 respectively. They're paying 18 and 21% respectively on those lines of credit. Car loans, student loans, mortgages, they tend to be, a lot lower than that. Current interest rate, I think, on a mortgage, and don't quote me, probably between 5.5% and 6%. It's much lower than 18 or 21% on a credit card. Car loans, same thing. Maybe it's 5, 6, 7%. Significantly lower and a lot more manageable on a monthly basis than taking out a personal loan or putting a bunch of money on a high interest credit card. And so to get a handle on the debt, take a look at all your loan balances, take a look at all the interest, and then we'll talk about right in this next slide, how to ultimately pay down those balances. So next slide. There's really two ways of paying off your debt. There's the avalanche and the snowball methods. I don't know why they pick cold weather, but we'll run with it. So the avalanche method is you start at the top. You take your highest interest paying debt, credit cards, maybe that is your car payment, any medical bills, and you pay those off first, and then you worry about the lower interest credit payments later. It'll help you reduce the amount of interest that you pay over time, and it helps you focus on the actual rate that you're paying on that interest. The snowball method is you start at the bottom and you work your way up. It focuses on balance size more than it might the interest, right? So if you have $3,000 on a credit card and $12,000 on a car payment, you want to try to pay that credit card off first and then the car payment after that. My personal advice is the avalanche method is ultimately the better method. It might be a little bit more difficult because you're paying higher credit first and you're leaving the lower credit payments down at the bottom. But at the end of the day, like the second to last slide showed you, if you're going to pay an extra $2,000, $2,300 a month, then that's money that you could ultimately be saving into emergency fund, saving to retirement. So you want to avoid paying interest, using that avalanche method.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to add to that, a critical thing on the avalanche or the snowball is that when they're done with one of those payments, take that minimum, add it to the next one.
Right.
If you're saying you have an extra 300 now,
Right.
now you start, kissing it off, you should add that to the minimum of the next one.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, if you have a $300 a month credit card payment, you pay that credit line off, take that $300 and apply it to the next credit card or to a mortgage or to a car payment. That'll ultimately help you pay down those other lines of credit a lot more quickly so that now once you're done with all of it, you're done in a short amount of time with less interest paid. And now you could take that extra money that you have and use it towards the goals. Next slide. So understanding your credit score, we'll touch just briefly, good credit versus bad credit, right? 850, 900, that's great credit. You're paying everything on time, you're a reliable creditor. Anybody will really lend to you because they know that they're going to get their money's worth. 300 is the below average credit. It's a lot more difficult to go and get a car to buy a house if you're ultimately sitting there coming to the bank with a 300 credit score. What's important, what a lot of people don't necessarily know the ins and outs of, is that right-hand pie chart with what goes into your credit. So 10% is new credit. So if you get a new credit line, a new credit card, you get a mortgage payment, you get a car payment, that's going to bring your credit down, because now it has an effect. You owe more, and so your credit is not going to be as good, especially if you already have outstanding lines of credit. How you bring that back up is you just continue to pay that consistently. The length of your credit history is 15%. So a big thing for the parents in the room, or the to-be parents in the room, put your kid on your credit card as an authorized signer. If you're good at paying down your credit and you're good about making those monthly payments, you put your kid on that credit card. By the time they turn 18 and they go and they want to buy their first car, they're already going to have well-established credit, because you've done all the work for them. So now they're coming into the world saying, well, I got an 800 credit score. I can go get a loan from anybody, and I didn't have to do anything. And so doing that, only if you're doing the right things can be really valuable. If you do the wrong thing, then you set your kid up for a really tough road ahead. So take care of yourself first, but that's a really good way to have the next generation come up with a lot better credit if you put them as an authorized signer on that credit card. My mom did that for me, gave me like a $2,000 credit card. She said, never ever put money on this, ever. And I was like, well, why not? And she's like, because I'll put whatever I want on it and then pay it down. And it's worked wonders. I mean, now I understand credit a lot more. I also have a good credit score because from the time I was 5, 6, 7 years old, she was able to do those things and was really smart to ultimately put me at a place where now any bank I can walk into and they'll loan you money and not have to pay more in interest. Your credit mix is another 10%. Car payments, credit cards, mortgages, personal loans, student loans, all that plays into your credit history. The biggest one is the amount that you owe, right? If you have $10,000 and that's all you owe, and let's say your income is $7,000 a month, your credit's going to be pretty good because you can just pay down that line and it's not a big deal. If you have like $50,000 in like credit card expenses, they're going to look at that and they're going to say, okay, you owe a lot more. It's taking you more time to pay that down. Your credit score is ultimately going to go down. So amount owed is a big thing, and then the other big one is obviously payment history. If you've been on time with your payments, your credit isn't going to drop. When you don't make a payment or you miss a payment, your credit won't drop if you're doing those things. If you miss a payment, if you're only paying the minimums, then your credit's ultimately going to suffer from that, because yes, you're meeting your obligation paying the minimums, but you're not doing as much as you really should be. So again, when it comes down to it, especially with the credit cards, if you're going to use it for the month, pay it off with the money that you have in a checking account so that it ultimately keeps your credit score high. A lot of apps for your bank, they also go and you can go and look up what your credit score is, and it'll show you a 6-month track of where your credit was and has been. And so that being able to track that is important as well, because if you're going to go buy a house, you want to know that you're walking in with good credit versus not having any idea. The bank runs your credit and they see that your score was a lot lower than you initially expected. Next slide. So tying it all together, pay a bit more than you can. Pay on time every time. Understand why you use credit in the first place, and watch what you're spending your money on. Next slide. So the big thing, and kind of wrapping up the last bit of the presentation, and then we'll take questions, is preparing for the future. So really, this is what I help my clients do. Whether that future is 1 year, 5 year, 10 years, 50 years, or even generationally. So on average, the average household spend of retirees is about $52,000. By the time I retire, it'll probably be closer to $100,000, if not more, in retirement expenses. You no longer have money coming in. You no longer are working a job. So now all that saving that you've done over the course of your life into a 401k, into your emergency funds, all of that is now being spent out. You're using that to ultimately fund your lifestyle. And what we call that is our desired retirement lifestyle. So most people retire at 65. Great time to retire. You still got, probably 30 years ahead of you with, how healthy people are and how long people are living. If you think about when you started your first job out of college or out of high school, you probably worked for 30 to 40 years. 30 to 40 years, you got a steady income coming in. Now you got to go and do 30 years without having any income. How are you going to do that? That's where you ultimately are preparing for your future now, saving for retirement, and saving for future generations. So next slide. So you guys might be wondering, why do you need to prepare for retirement? You're 25, 30, 40, even 45, 50. Why do you need to save for retirement? Because it really can't wait. To save up the amount that you're going to need to ultimately spend down in retirement, is going to be a high dollar amount. And then importantly on top of that is, well, what do you want to leave to future generations? Do you want to spend all your money, or do you want to be able to leave some of the money that you don't spend to your future generations? The earlier you start, the more you'll have, the more you'll be able to spend, and or the more you'll be able to ultimately leave, to the next generation. You should estimate to need approximately 80 to 90% of your pre-retirement after-tax income for each year that you'll be retired. So you multiply that percentage, that 85%, times the number of years that you'll be retired, let's say 30 years, and then that gives you the idea of this is what I'm going to need, how much I'm going to need in retirement to not outlive the money that I have. What does that equate to? That means you need a plan. It means that you need to begin to plan for these things sooner rather than later. And the next slide will kind of show you a good example of the difference in balances that you could have. And so let's take person A on the left-hand side at 35, person B, Terry, at 45. Chris on the right-hand side is age 35. He's contributing $133 a month. So over 30 years, he's saved $48,000. If he's invested it properly and invested it with the right people, then that number could be much higher even than the $130,241 that you see. So just 10 years later, Terry starts saving at 45. She contributes $200. She gets $48,000 over 20 years, and that balance is $91,129. So you can see the difference there in starting early versus starting later. So the earlier you start, the better off you're going to be. They save the same amount. It's just the difference over a 20 and 30 year period, and ultimately that can put you at a much better place when you do retire to be able to have enough to fund your retirement living. On the next slide, this is the easiest, most important way to be able to start saving for your retirement. If your company offers a 401k, like I mentioned, you should be contributing to that. A lot of companies offer a match. So if you're paying 5% and they match 5%, they're essentially putting in the same amount that you're putting in, and that doesn't come out of your pocket. It's also pre-tax. So you don't pay taxes on it. 401ks, retirement plans are tax deferred, meaning you don't pay any taxes until you actually pull the money out of the account and start using it for whatever reasons. It being a pre-tax contribution can actually reduce your taxable income on an annual basis. So let's say you take a person that's making $100,000 a year and they save $10,000 to their 401k. You take another person that's saving $100,000 a year and doesn't save anything. Person B is going to pay income tax on $100,000 as their gross income for the year. Person A is only going to pay taxes on $90,000 of their gross income because they took $10,000 of that pre-tax money and saved it for retirement. So really what they only took home as gross income was $90,000. So you save yourself some money on taxes on the front end by also saving for yourself for retirement on the back end. And so ultimately talking about taxation of different retirement accounts could be a much longer drawn-out conversation, and I won't keep you guys here that long. But understanding that is important as well. So if you guys have questions on that, definitely feel free to ask. And so, kind of wrapping it all up on the last couple slides here. Types of accounts you can save into for retirement: 401k. An IRA is an individual retirement account, and an HSA is a health savings account. IRAs, 401ks, essentially very similar vehicles. The caveat with retirement accounts, a lot of times you should not touch them. Every time you should not, but you can with certain asterisks next to it. You should not touch this money until you're at least 59 and a half. Why that is because you pay it. If you're 35 and you pull money out of a retirement account, they'll give you your money. You have to pay taxes on it because you now have removed money from the account. So if you paying 24% taxes, now you got to pay 24% on that distribution. Plus, the government created these types of accounts for retirement specifically. So they also take a 10% penalty on top of that when you're before the age of 59 and a half. So if you don't need the money, you shouldn't be pulling it out. That's where having an emergency fund, that's where having a budget, and everything that we've talked about up until now is really important. So you don't have to pull money for emergency expenses out of a retirement account. You need $10,000, well actually you got to pull $15,000 out of that account, and 5,000 of that is going to the government. Don't want to have to do that more than we could. And so no matter what way you look at it, retirement should be a primary goal for everybody. Understand how much your company offers in 401k match. Understand the limits of how much you can contribute. There are dollar amount limits to saving personally into retirement accounts, both 401ks and IRAs. If you're self-employed, there's also types of retirement accounts that you can save into specifically. If you're a business owner, there's tons of different kind of trajectories you can go to ultimately save for retirement, no matter what your work life looks like, no matter what your financial situation is. And a lot of times these retirement accounts offer catch-ups after the age of 50. So you turn 50, now you can start saving a little bit more. Really just more of an advantage to be able to save for more for retirement. And so last slide here, things to consider. What are your employee benefits? Do they offer a 401k? That might be an important distinction for picking one job over another. If the jobs pay the same, but one company offers a 401k plan, that might be the one to go to. You're going to thank yourself later. If they do offer a 401k plan, do they match? How much do they match? You should be at least contributing what they match into your account. If they'll match 5%, contribute 5%. If they match 30%, maybe then you match, as they usually have a limit. You can do 10% and then we'll match, whatever else. Start saving early. That is the most and biggest important key. If you could start saving at 18, you're going to have a lot more money left over when you're 65 than if you start saving at age 40. But it's never too late to start doing that. And then increasing your contributions if you can periodically. That can really kind of help put you, at a better place. So that's really what I have. What I wanted to just touch on really quick before we go to questions is a lot of people have home purchases as a goal. It should be a goal. Owning a home is a great investment. It's something that appreciates in value that you ultimately can use to live in, that you can use to rent out. Explore what options there are, especially in California. If the down payments are too much, the interest rates are too high. A lot of banks offer first-time homebuyer programs. Bank of America itself is doing an initiative where they're essentially giving people down payments with certain caveats behind that to be able to help people get their foot in the door for home ownership. Once you break that barrier to entry, the sky is the limit. Sometimes just breaking that barrier to entry is the hardest part. And so if you've done all these things right, if you've started saving early, if you've created a good emergency fund, if you've made your money and you've spent your money where you want to spend it, and you still have some left over at the end, that's when you work with somebody like myself, like our team, creating an estate plan. There are certain limits on how much your estate can leave before you pay taxes. That number's actually going to go down in 2026. Right now, between a couple, it's like $25 million. So if your estate is over $25 million, you pay taxes on everything that you leave to your kids after that 25. For a couple in 2026, it'll probably be close to $12 million. So still a huge estate, but if you're at $10 million when 2026 hits, and let's say the market does well, now you're at 12 million, you pass away, now you haven't had a plan to pay those taxes that your estate might owe. So understanding that there are things like trusts that you should be setting up for yourself, for your kids. If you own property at all, you should have a trust. It doesn't matter how old you are, you should own a trust in that. You want to also, a reason why you want to have a trust is to avoid probate. Probate is really expensive, it's really time consuming, and it's really a detriment to somebody who just lost a loved one. Unlike the estate tax minimum at $25 million, any estate that's over $129,000 without any beneficiaries set up or trust set up can go to probate. So if you have $130,000 and you don't have any beneficiaries on your retirement accounts, you don't have a trust set up, that can go to probate. Essentially what probate is anybody can come and lay claim to your money. And don't think that just because you have a lot of money that all these people who are rich have this set up. Prince was a huge, huge celebrity who did not have an estate plan. So people were just coming out of the woodwork saying, yeah, I know Prince. I deserve some of his money. So when we look at doing those things, no matter what dollar amount of money that you have, you should do that, because if you want to take care of the next generation, that's the best way to do it. It helps them ultimately get what they're entitled to, what you have wanted to leave them, and then ultimately, use that in a proper way. And hopefully you've stewarded them in such a way that they understand finances and can make, quality financial decisions with your money, so you're not rolling over in the grave. So thank you guys for the time today. I hope you found it informative. And so now I'll take some questions, or we'll pass the anonymous questions around, but feel free to ask anything if you want to know about the markets, if you want to know about anything we just talked about. Now's the time to ask. So.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time, sir. We appreciate the knowledge. A couple questions. So, first one, what's the difference between an estate versus trust? First question. And the second question, based on what you guys have looked at, the pre-tax IRA versus post-tax IRA, seeing how inflation and taxes continue to go up, does it make sense for someone to bite the bullet now at the lower cost versus, trying to think you're getting it now, but they have to pay way more later?
Yeah, good question. So to answer your first question, the difference between an estate and a trust. A trust is essentially a legal document that says, I have this much, I own this much in assets, in property, a car, a house, stocks, bonds, whatever, and this is how this is supposed to be passed on after I pass away, right? So legally, financial firms, estate planning attorneys, they set that up so that ultimately your money goes to the people that you want it to go, the charities you want to go to when you pass away. An estate is everything that you own. So your estate can be in a trust, right? So all the property, all the assets, all the cars can go into an estate. And a lot of times people have things in their estate that they didn't even realize. Maybe you bought a piece of artwork and that particular artist blew up. You bought it for $500, now it's worth $1 million, right? That art is included in your estate, right? So estate is everything that you have. A trust is the vehicle to determine how that money is distributed and passed on to the beneficiaries or charities or however you want that to go after you pass. To answer your second question, in terms of saving into a retirement plan, so there's two types of individual retirement accounts: traditional retirement accounts, traditional IRAs, and Roth IRAs. Roth IRAs, you put in money that you've already paid taxes on, and you ultimately get to pull that money out tax-free when you retire. So if you're in a low tax bracket now, it can be very advantageous to do that, because when you retire, you say you're collecting Social Security, your taxable income is probably not going to be as much as it is. If you're making $500,000 a year when you're working, you're probably not going to make $500,000 a year in retirement, right? So it makes more sense to not have to pay taxes if you're paying lower taxes now and not paying any tax, and you don't want to pay any taxes in the future. A traditional IRA is tax deferred and comes with pre-tax dollars. So you don't pay money now, you just pay the tax later after you pull the money out from the account. Really, when we look at it with a lot of people, is we know that unless they have income from other sources, and a lot of people do, rentals, Airbnb, a side job, whatever that might be, their taxable income is going to be lower at retirement. So it's not one way or the other. It's kind of determining, okay, if I know that I'm going to accumulate, let's say, a lot of property and run a lot of rentals when I'm 65, and your taxable income's now $300,000 a year just off of that passive income from property, maybe you want to consider saving for a retirement account, saving into a Roth early, so that now you don't have to pay, taxes on that money that you have to pull out. With a Roth, there are a couple stipulations. You have to be making under a certain amount of income on an annual basis to be able to contribute that. I think the number is like 129,000 for single individuals. If you're married, that number's a little bit higher, but it kind of phases itself out. So if you make $200,000, you are going to be more opted to save into a traditional retirement account. The limits on saving that into those retirement accounts on an annual basis, if you're under the age of 50, is $7,000. If you're over the age of 50, I think it's $7,500. So you got to take those things into account as well. I always recommend for people who are younger, if you're in that like 18 to 35 and you're making 100, 130 or less, start saving into a Roth. It's going to grow a lot. It's going to take a lot longer to grow, and ultimately, when you pull it out, you're not going to have to pay taxes on that. So, good question.
On that traditional IRA, when you're paying that taxes later on, they're not doing it based on what you accumulated over the years, it's based on what you're currently making, right?
They do it on base what you're currently making. So if you're making Social Security $40,000 a year, you're going to be in whatever that tax bracket is for $40,000 a year. So as you pull that money out, that's going to add to your taxable income. So if you make $40,000 from Social Security and you pull out $7,000 from a retirement account over the course of that year, now your taxable income's $47,000. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, best financial tips. Don't go buy that diamond chain. You don't really need it. That's true, but it you see a lot of times with like these celebrities, they sign a big contract and I'm gonna go buy my mom a Bentley and I'm gonna go buy this iced out watch or whatever. Great, probably not worth it. So best tips for recent grads. Obviously creating a budget, knowing how much you're going to be spending, because my dad told me when I graduated from college, congratulations, you just finished the second easiest part of your life. And I was like, oh boy, okay, I'm in for it. But now you're pretty much on your own, right? And so you have to understand that the dining hall, there's no real life, adult dining halls anymore, right? You got to go buy your own food. You got to go, do all those things that you were really not afforded in college as an adult. The real world hits you. So understanding what you're saving or what you're spending, understanding how much you have coming in, picking a job that does offer good benefits, 401k plan. But on top of that too, like health insurance is super, super important. I think I pay like $100 a month for health insurance. And I told you guys, some of my health insurance bills were like $200,000. So, knowing that those things might come up and picking, a company to work for that can ultimately offer, those kinds of protections for you. Spend as little as possible on the things that don't really matter. You don't need to come out of college and you don't need to go buy that new Tesla. Don't get me wrong, Teslas are great. I want a Tesla. I wanted to buy a Tesla, but when I looked at my finances, I was like, maybe not. Maybe when I make a little bit more. A lot of times for recent grads, and I ran into this myself, is especially in California, consider living with roommates. Instead of paying $2,300 a month in rent, if you live with another person and you're paying, $1,200 a month in rent, that can significantly help you start to save for the other things that are important, in the future. And I think from an emotional standpoint, like, don't be peer pressured into doing the things that all your friends want to do, because their financial situation is their own financial situation. Your financial situation is your financial situation. It is very tough to sit there. My friends are going to Colombia. My friends are going to Europe. My friends are going to Miami or New York. If you can't afford it, be honest with yourself and say, I can't afford it. Like, I would really love to go, but I can't. I have to pass that up. It's a hard thing to do, but it pays much more dividends in the future. I actually have one of my coast friends. We were supposed to go on, they went on a trip. They went to Colombia, and the trip itself probably cost $3,000, $3,500. Could I cover that? Yeah, no problem. Did I want to cover that? No. So what did I say? I'm going to have to pass. One of my friends did say yes, and now he's stressed out because he's going to have to start paying his student loans again. He's feeling underwater with his finances only for what? A good time that lasted 10 days? Don't get me wrong, experiences are great, but you have your whole life to experience those things. Like those countries aren't going anywhere. The fun events, Coachella's obviously going to be, at Coachella every 2 weekends in April for the next however many years. Like sometimes saying no to those things, though it might suck in the moment, can be really helpful for you in the future. Yeah, great question. We actually do a whole seminar on life insurance itself. I could have spent hours and hours talking about all the seminars that we have, but life insurance is a great tool, to be able to cover expenses for an unforeseen death and or to pass money on to your beneficiaries. So there's two types of life insurance, basic life insurance: term life insurance and whole life insurance. Whole life insurance is you pay a premium for a set amount of time, maybe 20 years, and then the policy remains in force until the day that you die. Term insurance is your insurance only covers you for that term. So if you do a 10-year term, then ultimately you're going to pay, a premium for 10 years, and as soon as that 10 years is up, if you want insurance again, you have to reapply and, be approved for that. It might come with a higher premium because now you're 10 years older, but it only covers you for a specific period of time. So there's like 10, 20, 30, and I think some companies even do 40-year term insurance. So about if you have insurance and you pass away, that money that goes to your beneficiary or beneficiaries is tax-free. So we actually use a tool for some of our higher net worth clients where they'll put money into an insurance policy right now and know that their kid is going to get $3, $4, $5 million and not have to pay any taxes on that when they die. And so it's a great vehicle to pass money on to the next generation. If you're younger and healthy, whole life is the best way to go. The premiums are going to be low. You only have to pay it for 15 or 10 or 20 years, then the policy remains in force. And when we look at term insurance, it's not a bad option either, but you can be very tactical about what you use term insurance for. If you have children that are college age, maybe you want to get a 5-year term insurance policy so that if you have an untimely death, your kid's college education is taken care of from those life insurance proceeds. Maybe your husband or your wife is the beneficiary and you've talked about it and stipulated that if I die and we get $500,000, that money is supposed to go to pay off, little Jimmy's college education so that they come out with no debt. Another way to use term insurance in terms of like financial planning is if you get a mortgage. If you get a mortgage for the first time, and let's say you're the primary breadwinner, your husband, your wife doesn't work, then you might have a $750,000 outstanding loan balance. If you pass away and you're the primary breadwinner, now you subject your spouse to have to raise the kids and go back to work and deal with all the financials. If you get a 30-year term policy and you pass away in that 30 years, you just get the policy for the amount that the mortgage is. And so if you have a $750,000 mortgage, and let's say you die and there's $500,000 left, but you bought a $750,000 insurance policy for 30 years, you use that, you pay off the loan, now your spouse doesn't have to worry about the mortgage payment, and you also have $250,000 extra tax-free dollars to be able to cover funeral expenses, to be able to cover education expenses, what have you. So life insurance is really, a key, a key product to have in terms of financial planning. It's how people used money that they were earning to ultimately pass a lot more money on to their children. And briefly, with the estate tax minimums, there are insurance products where you can gift money into an insurance policy, remove that money from your estate so they might not have to pay those taxes, and then you get your beneficiaries get that money tax-free. So beneficiaries can be individuals, beneficiaries could be a trust, it could be an entity, a church, a school, but really it's used for the two reasons: to cover an untimely death and to be able to pass on assets to the future generation.
The last question I have is your contact information. If we reach out to you again, if you have future questions, presentation, or for financial questions.
Yes, most definitely. I would highly appreciate any conversation with any of you. I have some cards in my bag. I'll stand at the back and I'll hand those out. Feel free to call me, to email me with any questions that you have. We do our financial planning for free. Essentially, we'll build you out a financial plan and show you where you're at. Obviously, the hopes is that you'll want to come and work with us as the people that have kind of started you out on your financial journey, but at least can give you a good sense of what your goals are, where you need to go, what you want to spend, how you're ultimately going to get there. So yeah, definitely feel free to reach out to me with any questions, or if you want to set up a meeting and kind of dive into your finances on a more personal level, one-on-one.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when we were talking about the money going to like an entity, you know, also goes to an LLC, like it's not a charitable organization, but an LLC that you established.
So potentially. That's a question to work with a CPA on more than a wealth manager. And we work closely with estate attorneys and CPAs all the time. But you want to make sure that if you can do that and you're planning to do that, that ultimately there's not any taxes, because there might be taxes, for leaving it to a taxable, entity versus like a nonprofit or something like that. So definitely a question around, a CPA, working with the estate attorney, working with people like us to help know, because the last thing you want to do is ultimately make the wrong decision financially. I had clients that did that and they're still paying, the price for that. And so definitely a further conversation, to have about that. Any final questions? Any thoughts? Any critiques? Did I do a bad job? Yeah, so that's a great question. Google is your best friend at that point, because there are certain cards that offer a lot more benefits to like a first-time credit card holder, right? So the things that you really want to take into account when you're getting your first credit card: is there an annual fee? A lot of times credit cards will have a $50, $95 annual fee. There's a lot of credit cards that don't have that annual fee. So now you're not even having to worry about using the credit card. What the interest rate is on that credit card, right? Is it 17%? Is it 25%? Not going to be a problem if you pay it off every month, but as you begin your credit journey, there might be months where that doesn't happen. So you want to understand what interest you might have to pay. And then again, if there are any potential cashback perks with that credit card. So like my Bank of America credit card, I get like 5.5% back on like dining out. So if I take a client out to eat and I spend $100, well, I only spent like $95 because I know I'm going to get $5 back. So some offer really great perks, and some don't. And so you want to know, okay, if I'm going to be spending on this credit card, where can I spend this credit card the most to get the most out of it, in terms of any kind of cash back or rewards. Travel cards do the same thing. If you plan to travel a lot, you can go and you buy whatever, and it gives you miles to be able to take the flight. So those are some things that you'll want to kind of take into consideration. But definitely the interest payment. Is there an annual fee? And then ultimately knowing what the credit line is. If you're brand new to it, I recommend starting off small. Maybe it's $500. You just put your Netflix payments on there and you just pay that off every month. That helps build your credit. And so, as you get more established in your credit history, you can just go on and you can continue to request credit line increases, and up to a certain point, they'll just keep giving them to you if you keep paying it off. So those are things to consider. Thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you, everybody. Can we give another round of applause for Mason? Really appreciate you. Mason, we wanted to say thank you. There's a Harbor T-shirt and a thank you card. Yeah. Yeah, so thank you so much. Appreciate all the knowledge. I think it's important sometimes when you're talking about finances, it kind of gets a little daunting, right, and a little overwhelming. I think we've all been there, and like you hear this and it's great and you feel empowered, but then you're like, man, this is a lot, right? And so sometimes the natural reaction is I don't want to think about it. I want to put it away. But it is important, right? In 2 Timothy 1:7, it says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, right, but of power and of love and a sound mind." And I think it's important that we leverage our community, right? People like Mason to really seek out those resources, right? Because through access to those resources, to that knowledge, whether it's Googling things, right? There's a ton of resources out there, and the more you spend, right, a little bit of time getting a little bit more knowledgeable over time, and building those habits over time, you definitely, you take that control, right? That's where the strength comes from. That's where the power comes from. And so that's a bit of an encouragement. Let's close out in prayer, because I think, like all things, right? God is with us in every part of our life, right? Our finances, our physical health and everything. So bow your heads with me. Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for this time that you've blessed us with. Thank you for blessing us with Mason, Lord. Thank you for the mind that you've given him, the heart that you've given him to take his time on a Sunday to do a little bit of work, pouring into us and our community, Lord. Pray, Lord, that you bless him. Pray that you continue to expand his reach and influence. May you continue to lift him up, Lord, that others may see his good works and know that you are his Father in heaven, Lord. So, Lord, we thank you. We pray that we support him and encourage him in all the ways that we can, in the same ways that he has for us, Lord. I pray that you give us strength, you give us a sound mind, and you give us the encouragement to leverage our resources in our community, Lord, because you not only care about our spiritual health and our physical health, but also our financial health, Lord. And so I pray that you're with us the rest of the day, the rest of the evening, and as we go forward this week. We love you, we honor you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you, everybody. There's more food. Grab food. Grab contact information for Mason. Thank you for sticking around.